Now, our next speaker, Kayla Andrade, Chief Operating Officer for Ontario Landlord Watch, did a little bit of research. She's an advocate for landlords, and there we go, big. I didn't actually plan that. So she works with groups of landlords. She's an investor, offering advice and guidance, making it easier and helping investors make it easier through, some new investors or existing investors, that whole process of tenancy and everything. We had a little brief conversation, and I got very passionate all of a sudden, and I stopped. So Kayla, Ontario Landlord Watch, provides the services to its members through education, policy development, and advocacy. Ontario Landlords Watch serves residential landlords and property managers by connecting members with a vast network of resources, including landlords, property managers, realtors, elected officials, businesses, and legal services. Please welcome Kayla Andrade to the stage, who will tell us more about Ontario Landlord Watch. Come on up.
Okay, so can you guys hear me? I usually just wing this completely every time I do it, and I get nervous every single time. So I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. So I've been a landlord since the age of 18. My husband and I invested into property in Brantford, a semi, being pregnant and all, but we never moved into it. We rented it out, and we rented an apartment in Cambridge, and then from there, we started to increase our portfolio, getting a semi, selling it, getting a fiveplex, holding on to the fiveplex, getting a triplex, holding on to that for 4 years, still have it, getting into another triplex, getting our single-family home finally where we're not living with tenants, and it was absolutely amazing, and it's the best decision that I can say that we've made for our family. So right now with, getting into managing at 18 and at 24, you're still just collecting the rent, making sure the tenants are happy, and all of a sudden my husband was at the rental unit and he said that a counselor or a candidate that was running in the election had came to him and said, "Hey, Kayla," or he's like, "This girl came to me and she said, hey, you're going to be responsible for your tenants' delinquent utility bills." And my husband's like, "You're crazy, like whatever." And he kind of, went on his merry way, came home, told me, and I'm like, What are you talking about? So end up finding out what a municipality was. Didn't know what municipality was at that time either. So started getting into getting to know the candidates, getting to know who actually is the elected officials, and finding out that they were indeed making landlords responsible for their tenants' delinquent utility bills. So I said, how do I stop this? Well, you can come to council and you can talk to them and tell them that you don't want it because your tenants pay their own utilities and you shouldn't be responsible for your tenants' delinquent utility bill. So we decided to go down to the council, figure out that it is actually indeed happening. So I said, okay, what do I have to do? The counselor told me, "Kayla, you need power. You have power in numbers. Get power in numbers." I sat on the phone. I called every Kijiji ad that I could possibly find that had plus utilities, and I said, "Hey, you guys are going to be responsible for your tenants' delinquent utility bills if you don't get down to this council meeting." We had the place full. We had the media there, we had everybody, and everyone was so upset with the fact, and they kind of deferred the issue for a later date, and that's when I said, okay, we're doing a protest. We're going to go right down to City Hall, and we're going to go right on their doorsteps, and we're going to have this protest. So we end up getting everybody from Kijiji again down at City Hall, and we were able to have the counselors, some of them stating we were blindsided by this. We did not know that there's going to be a trickle effect on the tenants on this, but the policy still went through. So we're still continuing to fight that for the 4 years. Then I realized the council is not changing their mind. It's a quick, easy, let's get the money that is not being given to us by the tenants and let's put it on to the homeowners. And then that's when we said we need to deal with this issue at a provincial level. So we got a petition that was drafted by a lawyer in Toronto. We sent that petition everywhere we could possibly have it. It was coming by email, it was coming by mail. We were flabbergasted to see how many people were actually getting this petition. And then after we got the petition, and we're getting phone calls and emails from other landlords saying, "Can you fight the RTA and the LTB?" And I'm like, what are they talking about? I just have a water billing petition. I'm like, okay, let me do some research here. And you start to read the RTA, the Residential and Tenancy Act, and you start to know the Landlord and Tenant Board, and you realize that everything in this society right now it's all tipped into the favor of the tenants, which the tenants who are abusing this system are getting away with it, and it's putting a bad taste in the investor's mouth where they don't want to deal with any type of rentals anymore, and they want to get out of the business, or they want to take their money and they want to do other things with it, such getting into secondary mortgages and lending out their money. They want to get into short-term rentals that way they're not dealing with long-term. They want to buy a hotel, for God's sakes. Whatever they can do to stop being long-term investors and getting themselves out of the rule book of the RTA and the Landlord and Tenant Board. So the one thing that from my years of experience of doing this, because I started in 2010, and you realize that they're not going to listen to rah landlords. Help us. We're the rich ones. We're the greedy little landlords. So I'm like, let's put us into a perspective of the landlords that we're talking about are the smaller landlords. We're not getting rich. This is a retirement plan that we're looking for, but let's use the small landlords as their solution to affordable housing and to deal with the homelessness. Because you can tell right now through every single city that's across Canada, homelessness is the #1 topic. And right away, when I start to listen to the elected officials and we get invited to meet with the Ministry of Housing, we start to see that it's actually, they think developers are the ones that are going to help them create more housing, affordable housing, and deal with the homeless issue. So we were actually able to get invited to the Minister's Forum that just recently passed last week, and we were able to have a all-day discussion, over 200 people, and we're like, you know what? This is what it is. This is how we're going to be able to brainstorm how to increase supply. And some of these people in the room were a lot of investors. I talk too much. This is only a tip. So now all of a sudden we're listening to the developers across the table, and the developers are like, we need land. We need land. The development charges need to be waived. We need to be able to have different type of rezoning for these type of properties that we want to buy. And our overall cost to build is getting crazy with the steel, the workers, the supplies, whatever we need. And we want it from the government. So I'm like, anything else you want? I'm like, okay, what are you going to do with the development charges? You still need to build that infrastructure. So they said, well, let's spread it across all of the taxpayers and then waive it for the developers. I said, or how about we look at small landlords? Let's look at the homeowners that actually own homes, and what can we do to convince them to open up their basements to secondary suites? What does it take to get additions put on? How easy can we make that? What red tape can we cut? And what kind of rooming houses that can be formed? Because rooming houses, I think, are very much needed, because we do have a society of mentally ill people with addiction, and they can't just be put in a room or an apartment and say, here you go, live on yourself. They need to have something of a transitional way of getting back into society, because you're taking people from the streets and you're saying, here, this is something that you're not used to, just go do it. So now we have a situation where, how do we do this when it's like, is it money? No, the government in the region of Waterloo is trying to offer homeowners $25,000 forgivable loan to open up their secondary suite, but your 2-bedroom unit has to be $847 to be qualified for this type of money. They're also going to guarantee the rent. If you take someone on social assistance or ODSP and you are putting them in your secondary suite, they'll guarantee the rent for you. And they'll also have a little fund available. If they damage the place, they'll help you out with the renovation cost. Sounds too good to be true, right? When you look at what a 2-bedroom unit in Waterloo region can rent for, between $1,300, $1,400, you have 2 bedrooms, you're probably going to put 4 people in there, the utility costs are rising, your taxes are now going to rise because you have a secondary suite going on there, your insurance is now going to go up. Is it really worth it for these investors to take this type of money and be able to rent out their secondary suite? Or do they say, hey, can I borrow, $30,000 and I'll give you 8% back on your interest? The money's not the factor for a lot of people. The reason why they don't do it is because of the Residential and Tenancy Act and the Landlord and Tenant Board. And that is the one that is needing to be changed if they want to encourage investors to invest in this industry. You have to have some thick skin. You need to know what you're doing, how you're doing it. And a lot of people don't have the education into knowing how to manage rental units or deal with certain issues, or even have the funding to deal with these maintenance issues that tenants actually have. So let's kind of consider ourselves. We changed the RTA. We changed the Landlord and Tenant Board. We create it where it's giving us the proper tools to run this type of business, and we will get into providing more rental units. And we feel that it's more of a build more rental units in the secondary suites, the additions on there, the rooming houses, and then you'll see that now there's more rental units on the market. There's more for tenants to choose from, and now the landlords, on the other hand, are going to continue to keep investing because now it's actually making some money for them, and it has to put it in a way where you have a bad tenant, we need to have that problem dealt with because it's very costly. It could bankrupt a smaller landlord. So we're trying to get homeowners to open up these secondary suites. Why are they going to take the risk and possibly be bankrupt and lose what they currently have, not even including the retirement plan that they have? So the way that we are working our advocacy now, I talk to so many type of elected officials. My goal now for 2019 is to continue to get into groups like this. It's kind of a build an army to win a war type of deal, and we have power in numbers. And this is why we've collaborated ourselves. Instead of having monthly meetings like this as Ontario Landlords Watch, we're online. We're on Facebook. It's a closed group. We're branching ourselves into a private group to be a little bit more on the fact of sharing a lot more details. But at the same time, when we're in that closed group, we're helping each other out, and we're able to say, what are the issues? What does it need? Does the government need to do to keep you in this industry or to get you into this industry? And let's work it out together. And when there is a function, I want to be able to connect with the landlords in Ontario and say, guys, we need to be here. We need to, write this letter to your MPP, contact your city councillor, give these elected officials your ideas how to actually create affordable housing, and I'll also get the homeless matter dealt with. Because really, homelessness is all of our issue. We look at why we're going to solve homelessness. You got to look at the fact that we have more funding that's going into the organizations from the government. We have more funding that's going to come into our hospitals because of people living on the streets. And we have more funding that are needed for the police to even deal with the matter. And now we need more funding to deal with mental health or addiction because these people are living on the street. You'd be surprised, you got to see how they're able to live on the street. Of course, they're taking drugs to just numb the pain where they don't even know what's happening right now. I just got an ice cube. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully I don't get a brain freeze. So what I've been really hammering out to the elected officials, social assistance and ODSP. That is a growing thing for taxpayers to be funding, is social assistance and ODSP. People will say, if they're on ODSP or assistance, they're coming to you and saying the rent is guaranteed to you. The rent is not guaranteed to you. They will send it for a little bit, and then they'll say, you know what, you didn't deal with my maintenance issue, so I just told my worker to stop the check from coming to you. It's going to come to me. I'm going to spend it. Now I'm on the eviction process. That's going to take 8 months. And I'll just skip from landlord to landlord to landlord to do it. So we're telling them that if you want us to take people on social assistance and ODSP, we are not discriminating against them because of the fact that they're on that type of system. One, they don't make enough to cover the cost of shelter, even though the elected officials just gave themselves a 20% increase on their living cost, but they don't make enough. Number two, you have to make sure that the shelter cost to that OW and ODSP is going into the landlord. And only an N9 or an N11, an agreement to end the tenancy, stops that payment from coming to the landlord. This helps people with mental illness and people that can't handle themselves. It keeps the money out of their hands and keeps a roof over their head. That's the number one bill that everyone should be going ahead and paying, but they choose not to. Then we have the overall government funding for housing organizations. In the Waterloo region, we have 26 organizations, and they all deal with trying to help people find affordable housing. And you get to know these organizations, and they do other type of stuff, but they get between like 10 million, 8 million, 5 million, and I'm like, damn, I'm like, that right there could keep people in their homes if you paid for their rent for the entire year, not only just the subsidy. So we want a massive review of these certain type of housing organizations that are in Ontario, because the money that could be saved from, merging them all into one to deal with the housing issue, that will be the funding that is needed to help the subsidy of OW and ODSP, give them a little bit more money and sending it into the landlord's hands where we're going to be able to keep them inside of their houses. But the way that we see it now is that there's duplicates of services, and I think that's what our Ford government is looking at, is cutting down the duplicates of services and trying to save money. And then we look at the fact of social housing. If you look at taxpayers, we're paying for social housing. They're finding the land, they're buying the land, they're building it, they're maintaining it, they're managing it, and then they're subsidizing it. And then the maintenance costs, because sometimes they have a lot more renovations that are needed to get people out, the taxpayers are paying for that. Do we really want to be continuing to pay for something that is not sustainable? It's not sustainable because these people, if they're in the unit, they're in there for 10 years. Nobody really cares to want to move out of it because there's no incentives to do it. And now you have an overall going, we're still constantly needing more and more and more. And that's the way the society's been running now for quite some time, where we're always needing more housing. As you can see, we have more people coming into this country now than we are with putting rental units on the market. And now that is crippling the housing system, and it's crippling the social assistance, and it's crippling the ODSP. This is how we have to start analyzing that there's a level of issues to deal with the housing industry. So getting into the red tape and the housing development taxes, this is where, we always get taxed higher based on what you have. Our taxes are going higher and higher each and every time, giving us some type of incentives. Any landlord who is providing all-inclusive utilities, why aren't these landlords getting some type of rebate, some type of tax credit or a cheaper rate, because they are putting the utilities in there, and landlords have no control on how many tenants can actually move into the place, even though you just put 2 in, now all of a sudden you have 7. There's nothing you can do unless there's some type of crowding bylaw that you could possibly work itself on. And then you have to deal with the adjudicator. And as any developers in here, the development charges, they are obviously the one thing that is stopping them from wanting to build. But again, they don't have the land. I've talked to so many developers. I'm like, how is it going? And, are you finding a lot? No, there's no land. We lost this bid. We lost that bid. So now we have to start really utilizing our current supply, and that would be the secondary suites. But in order to get that done, you have to change the RTA and the LTB. We need to have a big campaign like, hey, do you have a house? All your kids are gone? You have this big 4-bedroom house to yourself? Let us help you create the secondary suite. Let's help you make a business out of that home, and let's give you some extra income and also do something good for your community, and let's put someone in your basement. But right now, the way that they have it, no one wants to touch this with a 10-foot pole, because they see that the Toronto Star is educating all of our tenants out there on how to manipulate the system. So I will not do an interview with them anymore. So now that we get ourselves into the red tape and the development, we also get ourselves into municipal policies that really prevent landlords from getting into this, such as the water billing, how that has caused the rents to skyrocket. Even though the tenants are still responsible for paying their own utilities, we still might be able to evict them underneath an N5 for interfering with the landlord. But again, that is what is not allowing investors from Ottawa to want to come into Cambridge, because we're now responsible for our tenants' delinquent utility bills and sewage. And that rate is constantly increasing. I can tell you that because we have not touched the infrastructure in years. So be prepared for that one. Then you have landlord licensing. That is something that's spreading like wildfire. It's something that is reinventing the wheel. They're reinventing something that is already established. We have the Residential and Tenancy Act, the Landlord and Tenant Board. We have city property standards. If a tenant feels that they are not safe, they can call any of these people in. They're investigating your entire unit inside and out, and they're gonna tell you that you better put that screw back in the drywall because it's sticking out just a little bit. This is how crazy these inspectors are to deal with bylaw issues when it comes down to tenants feeling unsafe. But tenants also use it as a threat. So if they want to get back at the landlord, they're calling in the fire department, they're calling in property standards, and they're filing at the landlord and tenant board to try to get money back from the rent. So we have a huge issue at the fact that we need to keep the municipality kind of either doing this, the landlord tenant board doing it, but landlord licensing, that is just causing the rents to increase, and it's causing people to not want to invest into that area in itself. So now we have short-term rental licensing. So they're starting to see that we're getting out of the long-term and we're getting into short-term. So now all of a sudden they want us to say, well, we're gonna do a short-term rental licensing, and people are now fighting that. So it's always a part of, we have affordability issues, we have homelessness issues, and they think by putting a rent cap on our rent increases, they think that's the way that they want a whole rent freeze. They want to stop us from raising our rent monthly. They want literally where if you have a unit at $800, the tenant moves out, they want you to continue renting that at $800 and having some type of with the standard lease, we think it was like a database is what they were looking at doing, so that you would have to file your application so they can start to control how much you can actually raise your rent. Sorry, it's gonna be good stuff at the end though. This is still good because we have myself, who is, I swear, I'm surprised I don't get a harassment charge on these elected officials these days, because it's gonna be a constant trying to let them see that barrier, see the social assistance, see the government funding, see the RTA, the LTV, the red tape, the municipal policies. You deal with the issues within that. Give us a program that we can actually work, and I'll come to these type of events and say, hey guys, you wanna be landlords? This is how we do it. And this is with Ryan, his tiny homes. Obviously there's so many municipal policies that are preventing him from doing that type of thing. And they go, we want builders, we want developers, but they're not quite doing what they really quite need to allow us to do what we need to do. If they did, hey, anybody want a secondary suite? Don't worry about the permit, go for it. You really want housing? Try it, because they did that, I think it was in 1987, I think it was. They got the non-conforming type of secondary suites. Wow, I don't go by script, right? Social housing is not sustainable. Development of the rental properties. Now this is what our overall with the RTA, LTV, it's kind of all mixed together. We want to eliminate the 2.5 cap on the guideline rent increases. We want to raise the rent increase guideline to CPI plus 2% on higher for the properties where utilities are included. We feel that there is a difference. When you have a 1.8% increase, meanwhile your taxes went up a lot further, and if they decrease your taxes, they will send out a letter to your tenants telling you and your tenants that your rent is now lowered based on them not raising your taxes that year. Toronto is like, they love it in Toronto. They just dish that out. I'm like, don't contact my tenants and tell them that, please. Because it's not going down, because my insurance went up, my water went up. Like, just because you guys lowered a rate does not mean give you the authority to come in there and tell my tenants their rent is going to be lowered because they lowered your property taxes or never even raised your property taxes. So that's the part where a lot of people are, that's something that's really turning. I hope that Ottawa's not doing that. How many elected officials do we have in for Ottawa right now? I forget, you guys are here sometime? Okay, we're good. We want to restore the ability of landlords to claim increased utility costs. Right now, you can't even apply to the landlord and tenant board to say that your utility rates have went up.
you now need to raise the rent above the guidelines. They've taken that away. Based on Kathleen Wynne, we're at the point where we're like, listen, like that is the overall, the numbers need to work. If the numbers are not working, I'm taking it over for my own personal use and I'm getting out of the business because it's not worth it anymore. And we want to be able to allow the raise the rent above the guidelines, because sometimes when you want to sell a property and you look at having a tenant in there for 10 years, and when you tell the bank the rate of what these people are paying, yeah, we're only going to lend you this. It's like, damn it, we should have done those rent increases. Tip number one for everyone in the room that has rental properties, make sure you do your rent increases every single year. Do it for the simple fact that, hey, your rates are going up, theirs should go up as well. There's no difference between owning and renting. Everybody needs a place to live. Everyone has everything going up. Raise the rent increases. And number two, you do it because you want the government to start listening to us. And the only way to do that, because landlords can't protest. We can't go down and shut down the landlord and tenant board. We can't go march in the streets because we actually have jobs and we're busy and we can't really do it and we feel weird doing it. But that's what we have to do to kind of do that protest, is to keep raising the rents. And I will put on my rent increase, contact your city councillor and thank them, because that is the reason why that they continue to get rent increases now, is when they did that, put the risk of water bills right onto me. We don't think that tenants should be allowed to appeal the raise the rent above the guidelines. There's so many tenants that are now protesting. It started in Toronto, it went into Vancouver, it's now in Hamilton, and now tenants are saying, I'm not paying rent because you're trying to raise my rent 3% above the guidelines. But I want the landscaping, I want new parking, my drywall needs to be fixed, I want a new kitchen, I want to make sure my utilities are lower. They have such a high requirement to keep that property up to standard, but again, you're not getting we're not able to do all that work if the money's not even coming in. And now the tenants stop paying completely, and the landlord and tenant board sides with them over some type of technical area of a payment plan. And because they make payment plans, they're not granted that eviction based on the application that the property management company had filed for. Retrofitting. There's lots of retrofitting that's coming around, and that they're required for changes to regulation financial assistance for homeowners to retrofit. Whereas maybe some government grants can help us retrofit these type of rental properties. If not, they'll call property standards on you and they'll tell you to do it within 48 hours. Shorten the initial period of all applications. This is something that if you have went to the landlord and tenant board, you have a long wait time from N4 to 14 days. After the 14 days, you're applying to the landlord and tenant board. I just filed for one. My tenant is good, a little wonky on the payments, still having to go through the landlord and tenant board at times. And I just filed on Friday and I got a court date for March 26th. So now I had to wait 14 days, now I have to wait until March 26th, and then if I'm granted a standard eviction order, now I have to wait 11 days before I apply to the sheriff and then find out what the wait time is for the sheriff, which is usually around 3 weeks. So we're at the point where we're going, wow, that's like 4 months of rent gone. So now these people can now leave after the sheriff finally comes and then skip on to the next type of landlord. So we want to be able to shut that down. And why is it 14 days? Why couldn't it be 5 days on the N4 notice? Why is there a 7 days to correct your behavior on an N5? Like, no, it's one notice. If you don't correct it, and we got to show proof that you didn't correct it, we need to shorten those application timeframes because there's such a delay in the landlord and tenant board process right now, based on the lack of adjudicators. Now we're trying to tell the government that we don't really want you to hire any more adjudicators to deal with the backlog and the long wait times. We just need you to pull the L1 application, the non-payment of rent application. Why does that application need to be presented in a court type of settings in front of an adjudicator? Why can't the customer service officers who are picking up your phone and saying, hey, your tenant just filed an appeal, you now have to wait another court date? Why can't they say, have you paid? Can you show us proof of this within 48 hours? No? Okay, we're issuing 11-day standard eviction in the mail, even though the Ford government's now trying to take that from 11 days down to 6, and now all the tenant advocacy groups think that you could be kicked out of your house in 6 days. I'm like, no, that is not how it works. We wish it was, but it's not. So stop it. And this is how it's getting a backlash on the government based on the new changes that he's now just saying that he's going to come out with in the spring, especially where he's saying that we can hire our own private bailiff. This was something that we discussed in the meeting with the assistant of the minister, Christine Hogarth. I had half an hour, I took an hour, and I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I'll put everything in writing at the end of this. And she went back to the minister, told him about it. She said that we were very impressed with our presentation and what we had to say. They're now inviting us back in the fall because they're going to be reviewing the entire building code. And this is the stuff where we're saying, listen, let them build it. Build it, they will come, stop red taping it, stop working it where it's going to be restricting it. But we need to get that L1 application out of the board, and we need to speed up the process because there's 30,000 applications that are being brought to the landlord and tenant board for non-payment of the rent. That is the number one for landlords of what we're filing for. So when you look at the tenant side of it, there's only just over 6,000 applications that are filed with the landlord and tenant board, and you would think that the number one application for them was tenant maintenance issues. Would you agree? No, tenant rights. That's their number one application, is tenant rights, because if you infringe on your tenant rights, the adjudicator will grant your lovely tenant money back from their rent. Almost had the ice cube on that one again. Oh. So this is the type of way that we're like, no, like if you see that it was a maintenance issue, you would see like, yeah, greedy little landlords, but it's just the tenant rights part of it, and they will look for anything just to try to get money back on their rent. And there's literally adjudicators granting the tenant 6 months of half their rental rate. And the landlords are sitting there going, oh my God, are you kidding me? I have to deal with this tenant in my unit for 6 months paying half of what I actually want because they think I infringed on their rights. Oh my God, I'm getting out of it, I'm done, I'm not doing this no more. And we're not even protecting the current supply that we currently have because of the RTA and the LTB. There's no consistency with our adjudicators. You'll get an adjudicator that is like totally pro-landlord, and his name gets put in our group like, oh my God, I just had Bob from the landlord and tenant board. He totally gets us landlords. There is one in there that really believe in us. And that's it. And the rest of it's like, yep, the adjudicator just agree with the tenant. They're there. They just file an appeal, and now it's going to be dragged on even longer than what it's actually really supposed to. Because the tenants have the right to appeal any type of judgment that comes from the landlord and tenant board. Why is the landlord and tenant board there if they're now just going to appeal it? And if they are appealing it, now they could appeal it to the divisional court, which the tenant has a right to stay in the unit until you can actually get into the divisional court. And this is the one step that we don't talk about so much on the group online, because you never know who can kind of penetrate it, because that is something where this is bad. This is bad if tenants are trying to appeal it at the divisional court because of the time frame and the length that it takes to actually get it dealt with at the divisional court. So we want to be able to eliminate that appeal process with the landlord and tenant board, and we want the government to say that it's saving some money because the tenants are abusing that way because they are tapping into legal aid, and legal aid is funded by the taxpayer. So we're like, why is the tenants getting free legal aid but not the landlords? Just because we're rich, we have to pay for it. But it's not even for the part of paying. What if I want to send you to go represent me because you know everything? You know my tenant, you're the property manager, you can do it all. But nope, you're not a paralegal, so I gotta go. I have no clue what's going on with the tenant. I have no clue what's the situation, and I have no legal background, but I can go represent myself though. And that's the part where tenants, on the other hand, they can send Bob. Yeah, my buddy Bob's coming to represent me because I can't walk right now, and sure, the adjudicator's okay with it. Oh, I think there's a lot of issues. Am I good for time? Oh, God. Okay, we're going to go really quick here. There's lots of issues. I think we need a whole day just for the issues here, which you can, because we do have a landlord conference that we do every year just to talk about this stuff, what we've changed, and inviting the elected officials. So we want to be able to provide an expedited LTV process when a tenant is impairing the safety or the illegal productions in our rental unit. We think that is something that shouldn't be put through the regular type of waiting period. Allowing landlords to ban tobacco, smoking, cannabis smoking, growing cannabis, and the proper system to enforce such rules. Empower the LTV to correct notices with clinical errors when the intent is plain. We have so many different type of little things that we do, a little day off, their name, whatever the case may be, they'll throw it off, and then you gotta go reapply again and go through that wait time. Allow landlords to appoint any representative, like I mentioned, remove the free legal aid from the landlord and tenant board, or if they do have to give that legal aid, allow the tenants to go and get that type of legal representation prior to the landlord and tenant board hearing date so that it doesn't hold up the landlord and tenant board, or as well as mediation. There's an option to do mediation. I don't really think it's a really good idea, but again, let's get the mediation to the landlord and tenant prior to even them applying to the landlord and tenant board, so that kind of lowers down that backlog that we're currently experiencing with the landlord and tenant board. Maintenance concerns from tenants should not be heard at the landlord and tenant board if the tenant has not filed a proper application before the hearing date issued by the landlord for non-payment of rent. It's such a way for them to delay the process again, saying that there's a maintenance issue. They never said anything about the landlords, but we are going to be talking about a different type of program in our group on March 2nd, and this is going to be it's a company that really listened to us, and it's going to help us manage our property, and it's a system that the landlord and tenant board actually can adopt so that that could actually be fair, making sure that we're not getting ourselves into a fighting battle at the landlord and tenant board. The landlord should be able to ask for the government regulation damage deposit and pet deposit. Tenants have no reason to keep their place clean. They have no reason to stop their dog from chewing on the wall. It's not theirs. They don't really care. Landlords should be allowed to ban subleasing of their rental property. It's a way for tenants to hold on to that unit, keep the rent the way it is. We want to be able to say if we don't want it, then we shouldn't be allowed to have it. Landlords should be able to apply for an eviction for non-payment of the utility where the landlord is responsible for the utility bill. If they ain't paying that water bill, they should be able to be evicted on that easy, no questions asked, and it needs to be consistent within it. And like my number one thing is that we need to be able to hire a private bailiff to deal with their issues. And I think that, it's creating a job. Whoever wants to start a bailiff company, hey, you just, we're creating some jobs in the world just by speeding up a process that is really much needed. Small claims court should accept landlord and tenant board judgments without serving the tenant and at their new address. I don't know about you, you got a bad tenant, you think that are going to be like, hey, I'm moving down the street, just, if you need to serve me, right there. It doesn't happen. A list of names who have been reportedly being brought to the landlord and tenant board for non-payment of rent or damages. We feel that it's not about, we need to put these bad tenants in their spots, and if you've been to the board on a number of occasions, which you will see if you have to go to the board on a regular basis, you will get to see the same person with a different landlord there every single time. There's a bad landlord list, we need a bad tenant one, or a good tenant list where I have a good tenant, they're looking for a spot, I'm going to put them in on the wire and say, hey, these are the people that we really want to be protecting. Introducing policies that prevent tenants from moving in authorized tenants. The rent is scheduled for $900, 2-bedroom, 5 bedrooms, whatever you're getting for that price, you're not. And now you have a system where they're allowed to move in anybody into the unit. Utilities are going up. You're now responsible for more people in that rental unit. We should be able to say, no, you can't have all these people within the unit. Landlords should not be required to do 1 year lease, month to month, 60-day notice. This is a way for a tenant to feel that if they don't like it there, they're not forced to stay there. And this shows them that they're able to go ahead and leave whenever they want. And once we get that supply up, they're going to have those options to do that. And landlords will either have to straighten up their game, make sure the place looks great, make sure the rate is actually reflecting the unit that you're getting. Landlords should not have the option of, we should be able to create our own lease. It's a binding contract. The government's telling us we have to use the standard lease, but we can attach addendums onto it. Now, this will allow us to do what we need to do. The tenants are big boys and girls. They can read it. If you like it, sign it. The place is yours. You don't, there's another place down the street. Maybe. There's a housing crisis. Police involvement is needed to protect landlords. There's a landlord say it's a small, it's a civil matter. This is a landlord tenant board issue. I can't help you. It's like, he just said he was going to kill me. It's a landlord tenant board issue. And then the sheriff comes, hey, you know, like, I had until 8 o'clock to get their stuff out, the sheriff's gone, well, you gotta call the sheriff. No, he said to call you. No, you gotta call the sheriff. No, you're gonna tell these people to leave right now. And that is where there's a lot of no protection for the landlords when it comes down to our police involvement. Like I mentioned, access to mediation prior to the hearing, equal rights when it comes down to continuing a hearing for another day. Tenants seem to have the new date that they want, and it's usually granted, but it's not usually granted for the landlord. If a tenant doesn't show up at the landlord and tenant board hearing, the hearing should proceed without them. No excuses for doctor's appointments, etc. That is something that is definitely something that is normally used. And then we want to reinstate the ability to post 24-hour notices on the entry of the door. That has actually been reinstated because of the fact that they were infringing on the right and the way people are able to serve that notice. So we'll have to cross that off the to-do list. Landlords shouldn't have to store the tenant's belongings, especially after an eviction by the sheriff. They have lots of time to remove their belongings. And if a tenant has up to 1 year of tenancy to pursue issues at the landlord and tenant board, then the landlord should have the same right the tenants have and be able to pursue the tenant. Once the tenant leaves your unit, that's it. It's a small claim court issue, but the landlord and tenant can come back at you wherever you are in the next 2 years, and they're going to be able to bring you for any maintenance issue, any tenant rights issue. And this is the part where if you have all these rules that we want to see fixed, obviously the massive issue is within that right now. So we want to be able to say, we want to work with the government, we want to be able to partner with you, but this is what we need to meet your needs so that we're not paying for it really in the long run when it comes to our taxpayers. So as of right now, we will have our third conference on October 5th, 2019 in Cambridge. We are inviting elected officials, mayors, councillors, you name it, because we want to say, you know, in the spring the new rules are coming out. We want to be able to discuss that as a group at this conference, and we want to be able to go ahead and get to know of this program that we would like our members to start using, because it will be a program in which it's going to be a proper communication so that you're tracking maintenance issues, you're being able to track the rent payment history, and it's going to be like our own little landlord lingo back and forth. So we're going to be talking about that program at this conference as well, and then we're also doing a dinner and a dance this year. This is something that we feel that we work hard, we need to play hard, and everyone loves networking, so why not network with a nice meal and doing some dancing afterwards? And this is what we're trying to do to give back into our community of landlords, because without us, I don't think we're going to be able to see the type of housing that they actually need right now, because it's the smaller landlords and it's us in this room who are able to correct this housing crisis. But until they really get to us and see these are the levels of barriers and these are the solutions that we feel that you need to correct, then I'm saying good luck, keep putting $15 million into social housing. How many units is that actually going to bring you? Or look at all the houses that are in Ontario and know that there's a secondary suite that's being dying to be made. And the developers should be starting to make these single family homes in a way that it has the footings for these secondary suites. I think we have to realize that we're seeming to be too entitled, and people have to start merging. We have boomerang kids coming back. But we have to get ourselves into that concept that you have to fight for this industry right now. We're here trying to learn what else we can do, where we can put our money, but in the long run, you need to make sure you're putting as much effort that you are just to grow your portfolio into fighting the elected officials, into preventing them from making huge mistakes and making it worse in the housing community, because we've been doing this for so long, it's not working. Let's start working with the RT and the LTB. That needs to be changed, and we will get you more units. You just need to work with us.
I think I'm gonna stop right there. Yeah. Thank you very much.